This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Please don't tell, no, no, no. I just heard a rumor from a friend.
I guess it's Valentine's Day as well, so I don't know. Maybe they have plans.
Bob and Paul?
No, Blue-Eyed Kayla and Peggy Sue.
Oh.
So wait, you don't know anything about Peggy Sue yet?
I don't know anything about Peggy Sue.
Nothing. You didn't.
I've looked at this cracky headline, yes, and I think I've got the vague vibe. But
You've got the vibe.
I'm worried. I think it's gonna end up me picturing Peter Dutton doing a sexual act, and I'm not into that, you know.
No one asked you to picture that.
If you're into that, then that's cool. But this is not kind of my thing.
That's totally fine. Just not for me. Just don't push it on me, please. I had this explained to me early this week. I think it's been going for like a few weeks, but making its way into the mainstream. How to explain this? The Peter Dutton, Peggy Sue. If you've seen any of Peter Dutton's social media posts recently and seen all the comments being like, Peggy Sue, is that you? Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue. It is this Australian content creator who's also a full-service sex worker called, I believe her handle is like Blue-Eyed Kayla Jade or something.
Right.
Blue-Eyed Kayla Jade, yes, on TikTok. And she posts a bunch of content, including content about her work and clients that she sees. And she speaks specifically about this one client that she has who she uses the pseudonym Peggy Sue, a regular client of hers, someone that she refers to as, quote, a man of power in the workplace. Vague, but go with it.
Yep.
And what Peggy Sue really loves, which you might have guessed from the name, Peggy Sue. And the cracky article, I will say, the cracky article on this is too afraid, too cowardly to simply name the act. So we will do it on the independent media Serious Danger podcast. He likes to get fucked in the ass. And particularly it seems like, I think there's a bit of speculation that maybe he has a bit of like a humiliation king as well and wants bigger and bigger objects for the act and is like frustrated when they don't fit. And specifically, I believe that in one of the most recent bookings, Blue-Eyed Kayla Jade talks about how he wanted a shoe candle inserted in his butt.
Okay, do her clients know that she has this social media? I know it's all anonymous, but still.
She says, but she says, she then has this video where she's like, you guys need to start talking about Peggy Sue because he loves it. He loves seeing you all like talking about him and yeah.
Okay, no king shaming, but good luck to him. Yep.
So that's one part of the story. And then there's Legally Holly. I don't know what her last name is, but Holly, she's like a lawyer, I think, and she's also a content creator, another hot blonde woman on the TikTok platform. And she posts a bunch of political stuff as well. And someone commented on her post, one of her posts, saying, is Peter Dutton is Peggy Sue? And she replied kind of, you know, just satirically, not in a defamatory way at all, being like, are you onto something? And has since then, it's become like a running joke, and she has posted a bunch of videos basically encouraging people to do something extremely funny, which is go forth and comment Peggy Sue on all of Peter Dutton's social media posts and everything. And so I'm sure that would have been a really fun meeting.
Just imagine being the staffer.
Exactly. It's like morning meeting. Okay, everyone. So are there any issues coming up through media? We've got traditional media. Anything on socials, Sarah?
I'm on TikTok. Like, I got on TikTok really early, and everyone was like really impressed. I'm reaching out to the young people, and they love me, right?
She's like, okay, we need to remove candles from the office. Yeah, and I think there's even like it's full. Obviously, this is how the internet works. It's very conspiratorial, and there's videos of other people. I suspect potentially just like making shit up. Who knows? Maybe not. Other creators being like, "Yeah, I got a drink with someone who's high up in politics. Won't say who it is." And he started confiding in me about how he, you know, just needs to be humiliated because no one wants to stand up to him in his daily life. And then there's other people looking at like Peter Dutton's press conferences and where he's visiting and would he be in the same location as Blue-Eyed Kayla. It's a little bit of fun. Oh, a bit of fun.
I guess it's all a bit of fun. It's just that in this Crikey article, there's one line where Holly McAlpine says, if you're feeling down about the current state of Aussie politics, go comment Peggy Sue on Dutton's last post. I promise it will help.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it won't. I mean, I guess that's,
It's
I
kind of
don't
fun.
care. If people want to do that, it's fine.
If
that's the extent of your political action in 2025, then I think, come on, guys, let's do a little bit more.
I think that she posts a lot of good stuff. Like, I don't think this is just a fun way, I guess, to get people interested. And it is fucking working. Like, his comments are full of it. Although I suppose they tried this with JD Vance, right, in the States with the couch fucking thing. There was like just a random, I guess, initially started as a joke on the internet claim that in his book he spoke about fucking a couch. And that became
Scott
a running
Morrison
joke
shitting his pants at McDonald's.
Oh, yeah. Engadine Macca's. Yeah. I feel like it helps contribute to a vibe of this guy is a loser. Like, it's plain old bullying, and you designate who the loser is in the social group, and no one wants to be associated with them, right? So who would want to vote for Peggy Sue?
Can we do the reverse? Can we start like a rumor that Adam Band has got a massive dick? Adam Band is just fully packing.
Kayla Jade. Yeah, I've got this client, Badam Ant.
Peggy Sue got not long ago. Peggy Sue got not long ago.
When did the Greens become the party of anarchy and rebellion?
I can't answer when it changed. What you've seen it's not the party of Bob Brown anymore.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Well, welcome to Serious Danger. A big hello to Bob Brown if you're listening back to the episode that you're a guest on, and that's how things started.
Just remember, that's what this episode is.
That's what this is.
Sorry, Bob.
It's a podcast about green politics in Australia. It's not an official Greens Party podcast. We should make that clear. It's made possible with the help of the Green Institute. Adam Band has a massive schlong. It's produced by Michael Griffin. Tom Ballard here, coming to you from Wiradjuri country, and I'm joined, of course, by Emerald Moon. Hello.
Hello, I'm Amanjin. I'm on Yagara and Turrbal country. This week, of course, we are joined by, as Tom just said, a very special guest. Yes, we actually got the one and only Dr. Bob Brown on the podcast. A great man, a great tree, ? We don't know. We had a very good chat about whether the Greens are all just radicals and extremists, and can they ever win minority government again, and can they do it?
Because he's the Bob. When they say the Greens are no longer the party of Bob Brown, he's the guy that they're talking about.
He's the guy they're talking about. Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it?
It's a great chat. We were delighted to have him on the show. Yes, you got to get a lot out of that chat, I think. Big thanks to our patrons, to Jocelyn, Tracy, Grace, Layla, and Maria. Thank you for going to patreon.com/seriousdangerau. Thanks to Kristen, too, who very kindly increased their membership fee. That's an option. If you're already supporting the show for like $3 a month, that's very nice of you. If you have some more money, if you come into some inheritance or something, all the money goes towards supporting the show, paying Mike his wages, and lets us do what we do. So we love you very much, patrons. Thanks for doing it.
Yes. Our latest, we put out an extra bonus episode that's just for Patreon subscribers every couple of weeks. Our latest one that we just released is us listening to Peter Dutton's interview on the podcast Straight Talk. It was horrible. We fucking hated it. Straight Talk. Listen to us break that down for you so that you don't have to listen to it yourself.
Yes, they do not discuss the Peggy Sue allegations. I guess it was maybe a little bit too early. Isn't it?
Very interesting.
Silence from the mainstream media.
Do you know there are more trees on the planet than there are stars in our galaxy? There's so much for me to discover. My life now is just trees, isn't it? Trees and champagne.
Before we jump into our chat with Bob, of course, we should talk about some news. Last weekend, there was a couple of by-elections in Victoria, Super Saturday, in Werribee and in the seat of Prahran. We had the Greens candidate.
That's good. So, sorry, us Queenslanders, we've been struggling a little bit. We keep, like, over the last couple of weeks, we've been like, Prahran?
Prahran.
But it's Prahran. Is that?
I would say Prahran. If you were really fancy, probably if you're rich and you live in Prahran, you might say prawn. But,
prawn.
I say Prahran.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Previously held Greens seat, we had Angelica Di Camillo, the Greens candidate, on the show last year, and we did not win. We lost that seat. The Victorian Liberals have taken Prahran, and that is bad.
Yes, to be clear, that's quite bad.
Victorian Greens leader Ellen Sandell sent out a email to members saying that she was really proud of the positive, people-powered campaign we've run in Prahran and our excellent candidate, Angelica. It's clear, unfortunately, we've fell short of winning. You may be feeling disappointed, and that's okay. I am too, but I want to give you some important reasons to feel proud of everything we've accomplished together with our campaign in Prahran, and some reasons to feel hopeful too. And then she runs through a bunch of the explanations or broader context as to why this result might have
Is it
occurred.
just cope? Is it cope or is it real?
Well, that's my question to you. She says it's always going to be close. She mentions the unofficial Labor candidate did a preference deal with the Liberals, which made it even harder. So Labor did not run a candidate in this seat, but the former Labor member, I believe, or former Labor candidate, this guy called Tony Lupton, he ran as an independent, and he directed his preferences to the Liberals over the Greens. So that's a thing. What else have we got here? We've got Ellen Sandell said it's hard for a minor party to win in a by-election against big corporate donors. I mean, that's kind of every single election that we're involved in at all. But looking at the results, okay, so we have pretty much exactly the same primary vote as the Liberal candidate, okay, 36.2%.
Yeah, it was exact the same, right?
Exactly the same. The Liberal candidate got 7 more primary votes than Angelica did. So that's a 0.6% swing against the Greens on the primary vote, and a 4.8% swing to the Libs on the primary. In the two-party prefer, that breaks down to a 13% swing against the Greens. But you would say the primary vote of the Greens totally held up, but the differences, at least here, it does seem to have a lot to do with the preferences, right? I'm not saying that's a total explainer or way to explain away this loss, but it's a consideration, I suppose.
And I assume that, yes, comparing the way that preferences flowed from that independent candidate between the Greens and the Liberals this time was more heavily weighted towards the Liberals than, I suppose, the last election in that seat, and how the Labor preferences flowed then. Is that the comparison definitely does show that people followed the how to vote card?
Yeah, I mean, the loss of the Labor candidate has benefited Liberals to an extent, but also another independent called Nathan Chisholm, and there's sort of 1.5% to a bunch of other independents. There are a lot of independents running in this election, so that must be a factor, I suppose. Some other factors include the incredibly low turnout, 67% turnout.
Yeah,
I know
that's what I heard about.
Yeah, by-elections are particularly lower than average. I mean, and one happening in February, you could sort of say just getting people to understand that there's a fucking by-election happening is half the challenge. But that does seem particularly low to me, 67%.
It's incredibly low. It's honestly quite concerning. And I mean, this is kind of just vibes. I would love to know if there's empirical evidence out there about this, but maybe when Ellen Sandell is saying, it's harder for a minor party to win a by-election, presumably I think turnout is generally lower in by-elections. I also think that when turnout is lower, that's often going to skew towards conservative parties and conservative candidates, right? A lot of the time, left voting people are less likely, they're the ones who will drop off and not turn out. I think that seems to be the case in the US anyway, right? That's why there's such a big, push to get out the vote in their non-compulsory voting system.
Yes. I mean, yes, you got a lot of young people in Prahran. You've got a lot of uni students. They're still on holidays. This was sort of also a factor regularly cited by the Victorian Greens. Summer holidays, a lot of kids, a lot of people who live in Prahran normally may well not have been around on the 8th. They might have been out of the electorate. In the summer, just people's attention to politics is less. So that's kind of a factor. I also
think, surely with people, I can imagine that a lot of people, if you're not paying attention to politics, might think, I know there's an election coming up, but it's not for a while yet. It hasn't been called. I think people could potentially get confused with the federal election. I would find it very easy to do that.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
And look, Ellen makes the point that with the primary vote, staying relatively strong, it's not unreasonable to think the Greens could win Prahran back at the next full state election in 2026 too. So, in the same way that the Greens won Northcote at a by-election with Lydia Thorpe and then lost it again at the next state election, that could certainly be on the cards. But yes, I think it's bad that we lost this seat, and I think the party will have to, interrogate exactly what went on there for sure. Yeah, thank you. But the narrative that this is, the people of Prahran completely rejecting the Greens is, I think, way off the mark. And I tell you where you get some terrible analysis of this result was on Insiders of last week. I mean, fucking hell. The next day, Nikki Sava and Paul Sakal and stuff are on the couch, and Nikki's just like, "Oh, I just think, it's the Gaza and CFMEU." I think that's probably just why the people in this by-election in a state seat have definitely rejected the Greens. And I'm just like, you're pulling this out of your ass. You've done no research or interrogation of this seat or this race whatsoever. What the hell are you talking about?
I think there's something to I think that the Greens shouldn't dismiss the reality that there have been some not as good as hoped for results in a series of elections. You have to look at this at Prahran in the broader context of, ACT, Queensland, this, there have been a number of losses as well as gains that didn't eventuate. But what frustrates me is these commentators who just pick as the reasons the issues with which they disagree. They just go, well, it's because of Gaza and blah, blah, blah. And I actually the only reason that it may be some of those things is because you, the media, pushed that so hard as part of this narrative that the Greens are too extreme or not representative of people's everyday interests instead of ever reporting on their actual fucking policies. But also there is what are the real reasons that maybe the Greens haven't been able to make as many gains? You have to take into account the strength and the weight of the machinery that is fighting to hold the Greens back at the moment. In some ways, it's remarkable that the Greens have been able to hold their vote at a number of elections, given that there are literally millions of dollars pouring into keeping them out of Parliament, particularly after 22, because now the major parties and the mainstream media and the big corporations know that the Greens are coming and they're like, oh, fuck, and everything is turned on the Greens. I think, yes, particularly the major parties, they are teaming up to stop the Greens. We've seen it in the way that they did this preference deal, for example, or the electoral reforms this week that they, rushed through. It's they run the election. So when you're looking at election results, you kind of have to think, well, if the Greens are a major threat to the major parties, then it's going to be hard for them to hold their vote. Kind of impressive that they're holding it at all.
Well, our good friends Advance Australia were involved, and this was interesting. There was a story just before the election, the week of, right-wing lobby group in donations probe over anti-Greens push in Prahran. Victorian's election watchdog is investigating a complaint that right-wing lobby group Advance has not declared any donations in the state while bankrolling a campaign against the Greens in the hotly contested Prahran by-election. Advance has funded T-shirts, how-to-vote cards and social media advertisements urging voters to put the Greens last on ballot forms in Saturday's three-way count. But the campaigners are yet to declare any donations with the Victorian Electoral Commission. And so their argument is that, no, it's a national campaign, okay? That we're just running a national campaign on social media, on billboards and stuff.
There.
We're just against the Greens, and it just happens to be a by-election happening in which the Greens are competing.
We were having a meetup. We were all getting together for coffee, wearing our mock Greens shirts, and we had some flyers with us. And then we turned around, and there's the booth, this by-election booth. And we thought, well, look, if people are coming past, maybe we can hand them some flyers. I mean, what's the harm,
Kind of crazy. Advance said its television outdoor ads were part of a federal campaign that had run since June to expose the truth about the Greens. It has nothing to do with the by-election, does not mention by-election candidates, and was prepared before the by-election. It is a federal campaign. Now you sort of go, okay, well then after the results, why did you then post a giant graphic on social media saying, thank you, Prahran?
Really good question, Tom.
To the donors, the supporters, the incredible volunteers, you are the best. And to the voters, thank you for rejecting the division, the hate, the toxic politics, and the dangerous and policy agenda of the Greens. And then literally posting photos of them campaigning in the by-election.
Yeah, it doesn't quite add up, does it? I mean, you have to wonder, will Advance's obviously completely dodgy entire structure catch up with them eventually? I don't know, maybe not. But there's that story, and then there's also apparently, aren't they being investigated, or someone like a former Liberal Party member is urging for them to be investigated over the Cormac Foundation donation, because that's meant to be a Liberal Party funding vehicle. It's the premise for it is funny, right? It's the Cormac Foundation is meant to be for the principal benefit of the Liberal Party. And so this guy is like, yeah, but they gave a $500,000 donation to Advance, which is a separate body, and they're just going after the Greens, and shouldn't they just be funding the Liberal Party? And so then Advance has to be like, they either have to be like, well, no, our aim is principally to elect the Liberal Party, or the Cormack Foundation has to admit that they fucked up. So it's a bit of a rock and a hard place, but I'm sure they'll find a way to fucking weasel out of it.
Yeah, they're very good. They've got connections. Anyway, let's feel better about the world and talk to Bob Brown.
A visit by George W. Bush fired up the ageing radical.
Pushing and shoving failed to thwart Green Senators Bob Brown and Kerry Nettle, making their presidential protest personal.
He then shouted down the president during his address to Parliament.
Senator Brown will excuse himself from the House.
I love free speech.
This was familiar territory for the senator, who's been arrested several times since protesting against the Franklin Dam project in the early 80s.
All right, well, here we go. Our next guest needs very little introduction. He's a giant of the environmental movement in this country. He's one of the founders of what would eventually become the Australian Greens. You might have heard of it. He was a senator for Tasmania for 16 years, the first leader of the Federal Party, the founder of the Bob Brown Foundation, of course, and he has taken a break from getting arrested for his beliefs and doing amazing green stuff to talk to us here on Serious Danger. Dr. Bob Brown, thank you so much for joining us, mate.
Great to be with you, Tom and Emerald, and thank you for what you're doing.
Of course.
Finally.
No worries.
Finally,
we are recording this on Valentine's Day, we should say. Do you and your partner have any big romantic plans for this wonderful
he's
romantic
sitting here
day?
right next to me. Yes, we're going up to my old house at Liffey. There's been a heat wave here. On the Central Plateau, the temperature warning went out. It was going up to 21 degrees. So they had a heat alert out for the week, but it's cooling down now. We're expecting a bit of snow
21 degrees.
Tonight. Yes.
That's winter in Queensland.
Well,
freezing.
People who are over 80, and I just ticked over 80, they should go indoors and pull the blinds down. I survived.
Okay. You survived. Well, you survived many things. You can survive that.
Yeah.
So, look, we wanted to have you on the show, obviously, for some time, but particularly to talk about all of this not Bob Brown's Greens stuff. Obviously, there's this persistent through line running through anti-Greens campaigns that are run by people like Advance Australia that's then been picked up by, or some might say coordinated with, Murdoch's News Corp, and picked up by the major parties as well. And you are, I guess, this is the idea that the Greens aren't who they used to be. And you, as the founder of the party, are basically this kind of golden signifier of what the Greens used to be. So I'm curious from your perspective how you felt when you started seeing this stuff around, that the Greens aren't what they used to be. They're not Bob Brown's party anymore.
Yeah, it's an extension of when I was in there, and they're saying Bob Brown isn't who he used to be.
Right, interesting.
They would love, of course, the Greens who have a major platform and basis in environmentalism, because we all depend totally, we're 100% creatures from the natural environment, part of planet Earth's biosphere, which, so far as we know, is the only living one in the universe. There may be others, we don't know about it, but here we are. We're the only ones. And we're in this age of materialism where this we've got a plutocracy globally now, which means it's being run by the rich, who are getting richer as people get poorer, and the environment is being walloped. And they would love us to stick with the environment because they've got that under control. But of course, if there's not human justice, you won't get environmental justice, and vice versa. And so it's always been the case since I entered the parliament after coming out of jail in the Franklin campaign. I went into the state parliament. And by the way, I found that jail was a far friendlier place than parliament. But it's always been the case that what are the Greens doing talking about social justice issues? But we have, right from the outset, right back there from the formation of the United Tasmania Group, which is arguably the world's first Greens party, back in 1972. There it was, equal rights for women, concern and a better go for Indigenous people, and better democracy, a whole range of issues besides the core issue which got that party going, which was the saving of Lake Pedder, of course, which was illegally flooded by the powers that be of the day. It was a national park and it was illegal what they did. They had to respectively bring legislation through the parliament to make it legal. But that's as we can see with America at the moment, illegality, breaking constitutions, breaking tradition is a masterstroke of the extreme right. They do it all the time. I've watched that happen all the way down through my parliamentary career. They point the finger at everybody else, but they break the rules, and that actually led to the formation of the Greens way back then. But of course, social justice is incredibly important because it's how we treat each other, and if we can't treat each other well, we're certainly not going to treat the planet well.
So, yeah, it seems to me there's like two major objections to this. First of all, the point you make, yes, the Greens have been talking about issues outside the environment for as long as they've been around, social justice, economic justice, these are fundamental parts of what the party's been talking about. But the other implication is that, we all used to love Bob Brown. Bob Brown was just always this nice, reasonable guy that we here at the Murdoch Press, we always loved, and we might have differed politically, but we respected him, yada, yada, yada. And that must be bizarre for you to see, your sort of political enemies, people who are entirely against everything that you stand for and have regularly called you out as an extremist and as someone with terrible intentions for the country, now apparently saying, we love the ideas of the old Bob Brown. He was the best. That must be odd.
And back then I had to take the Murdoch Press to the Press Council, and the Press Council found them guilty of lying. They were claiming that when I was leader at the Greens were going to force people to ride bicycles and sell their cars, are going to make farmers go organic whether they liked it or not, where the children were going to have drugs, the whole absurd manufactured.
So the same things that they're saying now, effectively.
Yeah.
They're still doing it.
And, I spoke to the chief political correspondent of the Courier Mail in Brisbane when we had the Adani convoy going north, and she was picking us up on somebody put an objectionable post up on a website, which we took down. But I asked her, did objectionable post go up on Murdoch's website? And she refused to answer. And when you put it back the other way and you test them on credibility and truth, they're not forthcoming because, we have the media owned by the plutocracy, by the billionaires, by Murdoch and co, and we don't have a fair and even-handed media, and that means that we don't have a properly informed democracy. And it's fundamental to a functioning democracy that information is open and government and businesses are transparent. But what we've got now is a corporatocracy. We've got the corporates running the governments, and we've just seen the legislation that went through the federal parliament in Australia this week, giving enormous advantage to the Labor and Liberal Party. That's part of them being able to get more money from the corporates to stay in power and to stop this obvious drift away from both those big parties because they aren't socially just, they aren't ecologically doing the right thing, they aren't thinking about future generations. They're everything the corporates want, but they're not what the people want. And we'll see that drift away from the big parties continue at the federal election this year.
Yeah, this is sort of the other thing that you say, which is, well, it's not so much a matter of the Greens becoming more extreme or more radical or less representative of ordinary people's views. It's the major parties who have moved further to the right and further away from the issues that affect ordinary people and that ordinary people are worried about, whether it's the environment or inequality and cost of living. What do you think, though, about like maybe the specific examples that particularly the Murdoch media like to keep coming back to as to how the Greens are far more extreme than they used to be? I think the big ones, and these are listed in, you did that interview with Paul Sakal in the 9 Fairfax papers last year. His examples of the Greens being extreme include blocking housing bills, saying that Labor is complicit in Israel's genocide, opposing cuts to the NDIS, interestingly, calling for interest rate cuts and opposing the CFMEU administration bills and speaking at their rally. Are there any of those things that, you did feel, maybe if I was still there, we might have done that differently, or that's not quite the party that I knew, I guess?
No, Emerald, it's not when I left the party, I made it very clear that I wasn't going to be a watchdog or an old veteran, or as so many other ex-party leaders, Labor and Liberal, have done, a critique, a running critic of what the Greens,
not going to be the Greens, John
and
Howard,
the representatives were doing. Well, I think we're all got to be there to be part of the team, and the Greens are being picked on and have been picked on ever since their inception by the Labor and Liberal Party, in particular the Labor Party, because it hates the idea that the Greens have become the party of social justice, the very thing it should have been. It was founded for, and it's drifted right away from. And so I'm delighted to be an active part of the Greens. In fact, to be standing with young Owen Fitzgerald. I think he's the youngest Greens candidate in Australia when he makes his bid for the southernmost seat in Australia. That's Franklin for the next election. That'll be later today. It's my job, and I am an older Green, to be a supporter and a watchdog against those critics. I'm not here to watch against the Greens. I'm here to bat off those critics. And recently, The Australian, which has refused to print a number of opinion pieces I put forward, I gave up a couple of years ago,
really?
Contacted me and said, would you write an article about this very topic, that what you think of the Greens? So I did, and they didn't like it. They even ran an editorial. And in that editorial, they said that I wasn't just green, I was a bit red. I object to that word a bit. If red means social justice, if it means everybody having their basic needs met and their opportunity in life, go for it.
Yeah, this is so earlier this year in January, I think the Oz then published the piece. What was the opinion was titled "Bob Brown's Greens Wouldn't Recognise Their Own Party." That was Nick Cater. And then you responded with your own piece 2 days later. "Don't label me more moderate. I back Adam Bandt's Greens." This seemed to be kind of, it's interesting you mentioned Labor being upset that the Greens are now the party of social justice when they should have been, because this is kind of oriented around the idea that if the Greens ended up after this federal election in a minority government or the opportunity to share power with Labor again, maybe that would be less possible because you were reasonable and open and willing to negotiate back when the Greens were in balance of power, but Adam Bandt wouldn't be because Adam Bandt hates Labor and he won't deal with Labor. I mean, do you think that it was really this lovey-dovey relationship with Labor back then?
No, it was very difficult, and the same disdain for the Greens was there, but it was through gritted teeth that we made an arrangement with Labor in 1989 in Tasmania, which doubled the World Heritage Area. We prevented them from closing. They wanted to close 22 public schools. We brought in freedom of information legislation and so on. And then in 2010, with the Gillard government, we brought in that world-leading legislation for a carbon trading scheme to tackle climate change. But, the problem here is not with Adam Bandt, who's expressed quite openly the wish to have a good working relationship with Labor. As Labor with the Greens in New Zealand and Germany and Norway and Switzerland and all over the place. But here, there's just, I think the problem is that Labor is so obsequious to the corporations these days, the big corporations. And sadly, some of the unions foster that relationship with the big corporations instead of being there to tackle the increasing poverty that so many people find themselves in this world today. So Adam Bandt's not the problem. The problem is the Albos of the world who absolutely don't want to work with the Greens. And that's why I think if the Labor loses the forthcoming election, we'll see a new leadership very quickly. And that leadership is going to have to do what Helen Clark of New Zealand, former Prime Minister, said at the time. Couldn't understand it why Labor wouldn't work with the Greens. Of course you've got to work with the Greens. We're on the same we're on the same left side of the spectrum as against that alternative now, which is so far to the right with the Liberal National Party coalition.
Yeah, and drifting, further to the right, trying, Dutton openly kind of trying to align himself with Trump, obviously. On the Albanese question, I thought it was interesting in your interview with Paul Sakal, you were talking about Tanya Plibersek. You said, quote, it's a bit tragic that even Tanya Plibersek, who hasn't turned out to be a strong environment minister, is having the ground cut from underneath her repeatedly by the Prime Minister. This came out, this was in October, and that was before, as I understand it, the news it broke or it was revealed that Tanya Plibersek had negotiated a deal on stronger environmental laws with the Greens, and Albanese effectively made a captain's call and scuttled that deal, and those nature laws are now dead. Labor's dropped them. Do you think that, if the Labor leadership changed and perhaps if Tanya Plibersek became leader, relationships with the Greens might change, the approach of the Labor Party might change?
I don't think the approach of the Greens has got to change, as I said earlier. The Greens are open to working.
But Labor's approach to them, maybe.
Well, Labor's approach will change. They will change. They can do two things. They can sit it out in opposition, maybe forever, because their vote is around 30%, and it's a freak of the voting patterns that with 33% of the vote at the last election, they got a majority government. That won't happen again. So they can either do that or they can work with the Greens, and as they very often have to do in Parliament anyway. But there'll be better social justice and environmental outcomes. And my penny's worth there for the Green negotiators when the time comes is that you have to be upfront about what it is that you want to achieve in government. You have to make sure it's funded, and you have to do it in the first 3 months and let the public see what is happening there. Because otherwise the minority government will slip back into thinking it's majority government and trying to kick the Greens out for the next 3 years. So it's very important to strike a very clear bargain with the government at the outset and to know what that bargain is going to be.
Just on the nature and climate front too, this is again another infuriating element of this attack, this idea, the Greens, they don't talk about the environment anymore, they don't care about it, they talk about all these other issues. And then of course when the Greens do talk about the environment, when we take a hard line position, the correct line position, when we align our policy position and our negotiating position with the science when it comes to new fossil fuel projects, for example, when we were holding out during the safeguard mechanism, when you found yourself in a position in which you revoked your lifetime membership for the Australian Conservation Foundation, because they were just backing in Labor's inadequate safeguard mechanism policy. When we're actually out there, talking about the environment and trying to address the scale of the crisis that we're facing as a species, well, then, of course, we're extreme and unreasonable and we're the worst hippies in the world. Right? You can't win. You can't win, Bob.
Yeah, yes, you can win. You just got to stick true to your principle. And let me put in here two figures which are blithely ignored in modern decision-making. The first from the World Wildlife Fund, that is that 73% of the world's wildlife has been obliterated by human impact since 1970. That is, since I was a professional working as a doctor. 73%, 3/4 of the world's wildlife have been destroyed in this generation, and the rate is increasing. That's the extinction crisis. But let's move across to the climate crisis. The estimates from reliable economists is that our kids, when they get to my age, will have an average expendable income half of that which is available today. Now, we're in a cost of living crisis where many people can't make ends meet. How would our society work on half the income, but the cost being the same. That's what's coming down the line due to climate change, and it's being seen as an irrelevance. Well, we're looking there at a worse situation than the Great Depression, and the powers that be in the big parties, because the corporates don't want to look at that, are blithely ignoring it. And to ignore climate change is criminality against that next generation. That is nothing short of that. And that's what's happening in with both the Labor and the Coalition in Australia today. Now, it's up to the electorate to determine who they're going to put into the next parliament to try to correct that. I'm a very strong supporter of the Greens because I believe you need to be a strong, coordinated entity, a political party, if you're going to be able to make way in the current political world that we have. That's why I think it's great that there's independents and there's Teals also representing some of the points of view of the Greens in the parliament. But I have a great fear that they'll be picked off after the next election by Peter Dutton. He'll be very close to being a majority Prime Minister on current numbers, and all he has to do is pick off a number. He'll presumably have Mr. Katter first up. Then he's got to look around at which of the independents he can cajole across to his way of thinking. And it's not hard for a Prime Minister in that situation to start issuing large amounts of money to electorates or secretarial positions or speaker positions. So it's very daunting, and that's where the Greens are so much a better bet for voters, because they are the third political party. They're coordinated. They have a system of working together, and they can't be picked off one by one as other entities in the parliament will be able to. And I think voters need to know that before the election comes in April or May.
Just quickly, because I think we want to talk more about minority government. One thing I thought was a little bit funny in your opinion piece in The Australian, I was reading it and it almost read to me like you were saying, I'm actually more radical than Adam Bent, and I win this radical off. Because you said, for example, quote, no contemporary Greens MP has stood up on a visiting US president as Senator Kerry Nettle and I did when George W. Bush addressed Parliament during the illegal invasion of Iraq, nor have I seen a current mouthpiece of the right like its iconic Alan Jones rail against a current Greens MP as he did against me and Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Are you saying, Bob Brown, that you are more radical than Adam Bent? He needs to up his radical cred?
Whoa. No, I'm not. I'm just using examples there. For example, after Kerry and I stood up on George Bush, they changed the rules in Parliament, so there can't be a joint house sitting anymore. So what happens now is they have a sitting of the House of Representatives, and senators get invited in, but they have no status as members of Parliament in the House of Representatives. They're strangers like everybody else. Moreover, George Bush never addressed a parliament again. He was invited to the House of Commons and to other parliaments, but he didn't have the ticker to face up to political representatives simply challenging him on matters of gross government illegality, as was the invasion of Iraq. What I'm doing there, of course, is using examples that papers like the Australian want to make a point. Well, you can, in the course of debate, you can make points in the opposite direction, and that's what I'm doing there. But you only have to read the Murdoch media and much of the other media which coattails on it to see that Adam Bant and the current 16 Greens in the federal parliament do get classified as not being legitimate in the way that the other parties are. And that's blatant bias and false reporting by the news outlets that do that. It's very easy to throw around words like radical. In fact, I do that when it comes to Peter Dutton. But what is actually meant by radical is a purity of thought and reasoning, which the word's been corrupted. But I think that we are in a global environmental crisis, which is the biggest economic threat to the global order at the same time that there is. And we're in a extraordinary social crisis, and highlighted by what Elon Musk, arguably the richest person in the world, is doing in, for example, cutting US aid to the rest of the world. And as a result, hundreds, if not thousands of people will die because that guy has simply no empathy with the people who are struggling to get food for their kids and are living in abominable positions. So what's happening here? We do have a plutocracy. It's in Australia. You see it with Gina Reinhardt and the billionaire Mr. Pratt sitting there in El Margo or whatever it is, Trump next to Trump.
Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's obscene. It's absolutely obscene. But Labor luminaries, and this includes Albo, want to be seen with the same lot. That includes the Murdoch empire. So thank goodness the Greens are there as a level-headed, very moderate, principled party in a world which has swung severely to the right and which is bringing future civil insurrection into our societies everywhere around the world. People will ultimately not put up with it. And and I will blame the current crop of Labor and Liberal politicians when that happens. We're going to see a lot more of it, but they're going to be responsible for it, and they'll be sheeted right home to them. And those people who are saying that Adam Bandt and the Greens are radical now, of course, that's propaganda, but it's far from the reality. And the Greens we've always had to put up with that. I mean, I put up with that with Ron Boswell, the Queensland senator, and before that, Robin Gray, the whispering bulldozer premier of Tasmania, and Joe Jelke-Peterson flying down to Tasmania saying, you've got to have that dam on the Franklin River. That's 50 years ago, and they've always been at it. Well, good on the Greens for weathering all that and growing in numbers, as I predict they'll do at the next election.
Well, because I think, as you say, I was just going to say, like, what is terrifying to these institutions is that the Greens do make the link between environmental destruction, climate change, degradation of natural habitat, the link between that and corporate power and injustice and inequality. It is that link, I think, that terrifies them so much because that threatens their power. And so it's the fact that we've always made that link that's why they've always come after us and said, just focus on the trees. And it's like, well, it's the trees, and it's the oligarchy, and it's the plutocracy.
They have said that, Emerald, but what they've said now in New South Wales and Tasmania, at least, is focus on the trees. But if you stand in front of a tree to protect it from its wildlife, we'll send you to jail.
Yes, that's right.
And of course, the argument there is very clear. It came from America. It is that they can't win the environmental argument. 80% of Australians want an end to native forest logging and that broad-scale clearing of woodlands in Queensland. They can't win that argument, so what they want to do is take the spokespeople for the environment out of circulation, put them into jail. It is a police state mentality. It is, if we can't win the argument, we'll lock them up. And it's pervading democracies, and it's a very serious challenge. And that's why I like, having got out of Parliament, now being an activist for the planet, for the planet and its people, just based on the simple premise, don't get depressed, get active. And that's why it's great for people, all those people who are supporting the Greens, being politically active in a democracy, of course, is going for power, and people want you to go for power. And when you got that power, you need to use it, not be tugging your forelock to some other party, but you need to use it as best you can to get the best outcome for what you stand for. That's what the Greens are doing, and that's why I support them and I'm part of them.
Bloody oath. Well, that's good to hear. Because I would like your thoughts on this, Bob. I mean, obviously, yes, we also want more Greens in Parliament. We're excited for that. There are fantastic candidates gearing up for the 2025 election. At the same time, as a show, we've discussed this a lot. There is this narrative about recent state and territory elections in which things have not gone so great. We lost seats in the Queensland state election, in the ACT. Just last week, we lost the seat of Prahran in Victoria in a by-election. I mean, we've talked about how a lot of that narrative is overblown. What's left out is the fact that we picked up in seats in Tassie and Northern Territory, for example, but still, there's some concerning results. And if we want to be gathering momentum and building more power and building more seats, those results would kind of cut against that. What have you made of those results of late and that forming narrative that the Greens are losing it in some way?
Well, just let me take Prahran, because I was there when Sam Hibbins stood for that seat in 2014. And a funny story there, just quickly. He wanted all the media was there, and he wanted me to dial a constituent and speak to them and say, you should vote Green. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that, Sam. But he persisted, and I did. And they all got their cameras there, and the phone was on loudspeaker. So I dialed the number, and up it came, bam, 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 bam. This is Telstra. You are out of credit. And the little headline in the Australian the next day was, Bob Brown has no cred. But
that's pretty good.
That said, let's look at Prahran. It came down to the preferences of a former Labor member who was standing as an independent. So this is a Labor surrogate in essence. And that former Labor member gave his preferences to the Liberals, not the Greens. And that's why the Liberals won the seat.
Yeah.
And that's again the case of these two big parties effectively, if not directly, just mentally attuned to, we've got to do everything we can to stop the Greens. I mean, the Greens can wear that as a badge of honour, but that seat is still properly a Green seat, and the Green vote there would have been very strong, except for that aberration coming into it. I've been in as many elections as I lost the first 4 elections I stood for. These things come and go, but what is important is that the social and environmental and now democratic and peace, there's the 4 pillars of the Greens, indices are all going dramatically worse, and the Greens are essential there. And of course we want to see more people being elected, but it isn't a fair playing field. The media isn't going to give, and that includes the ABC, is not going to give fair and equal coverage to the Greens in the run to this coming election, based on my experience in past elections. And but we have social media these days. We have a big supporter base. We have a young population that's distressed about what's going on in the world and doesn't like what they see in conventional politics. And we know now that more people voted who are under 24, but at the last election, voted for the Greens than voted for the Liberal and National parties combined across Australia. That's something that's going to continue. So we're just got to stay true to the Greens' principles, stay in there, expect you'll get reverses on occasion, but watch when you get the breakthroughs, as you had in Queensland in the last election. And who knows what's I hope to get up there before the election is on, but who knows what the outcome is going to be. And I think Donald Trump is going to tend to polarize the vote between the Greens on one side, that is common sense and bringing some decency back into Parliament rather than having a criminal as president. And on the other side, the Dutton, there'll be a lot of people saying, oh, well, we better have Dutton because he's going to work well with Donald Trump. Well, what does that tell us? And so I think there's some forces at play here for the Greens, which haven't been yet well identified by the mainland media and by the mainstream media. And I think it's going to be an extremely interesting election. And seats like here, where I'm at the moment, Franklin, far south Tasmania, the Minister for logging of forests and polluting of waterways through industrial fish farming, the former Minister for Housing, who presided over Australia entering one of the worst housing crises in history, got 36% at the last election. Her seat is very, very much in doubt, I would say. And people have got good options, and that's why with Owen Fitzgerald standing for the Greens, and there's a couple of strong independents as well, it's going to be a very interesting election. I think we're going to see more of that right across Australia.
Well, I believe you're about to leave to go help launch that very campaign that you were talking about. So we won't keep you any longer. But Bob Brown, it has been a delight to talk to you. In terms of actions, things that people can do, I know that you'll be involved in the March in March for Forests. There are going to be marches happening all across the country to end native forest logging once and for all. Marchforforest.org is the website to go to. That's on March 23rd. And also there's this documentary, Takayna, The Heart of Lutruwita, that's having screenings all over the country at the moment. We'll put a link to that in the show notes too if people want to go along and see that documentary about the incredible forests that you can find in Lutruwita and why we need to protect them and why they're so vital. But Dr. Bob Brown, thank you very much for joining us on Serious Danger, and thanks for all that you do, mate. We appreciate it.
My great pleasure, and thank you, Tom, and thank you, Emerald, for what you do in helping get the message out that the Greens are the outstanding option for people who believe in saving this planet and bringing some social equity back into the way we think and treat others, so we all have a fair go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. It's been a pleasure.
Serious Danger Australia.